Live, and the show is just about to begin momentarily, just getting everyone warmed up. We have an official opener here at World Series News, and you're going to see and hear from Simon. You'll see his code on the screen in a moment. He's fresh from some very big appearances, and we're going to explain all that in a moment with some massive breaking news from around the world, including from Pakistan, Sweden, China, the UAE. It's happening all around the world. We've got big news on Ukraine as well, and we'll get sorted in just a moment and kick this show off, and you're going to meet the new News Brothers. Dare I say it? Let's put that up on the screen now. I'm going to play the opener, and we are going to get on with the show.
106 miles to Chicago. We got a full tank of gas, half a pack of cigarettes. It's dark, and we're wearing sunglasses. Hit it.
Well, there you go. That is how it works here. Simon, I'm going to bring you in now because I'm going to embarrass you in just a moment because I'm going to play something that was very, very special that happened yesterday. I'm going to get your reaction in just a moment, but let's add it in right now for our viewers that are joining us. And I just want to welcome all of the information warriors. That's the long word for the term that you all know. That very, very nasty 8 letters that gets you in all sorts of trouble. But the point is, this is where you get all the best news around the world, the latest information, the latest details, and all the details with Simon. But take a look at this from Alex Jones yesterday.
Simon, because this guy's been calling for years. He only gets through every 6 months or so. He is a genius, and I mean that. His analysis is so good. I want him to start over and take his time on this, and we're going to put his call at the front of the full show when we archive it to band.video today, because something's really good. I want to put it at the very front of the show, so put a note, guys. Start over, Simon, and give us a big picture here. I'm so glad you're here. And because you call before, you're always dead on. You have a way of crystallizing and condensing it down and say what I say in an hour in like 5 minutes. But
Simon, welcome to World Series News again. How about that? You had a big show yesterday with Alex and Owen, but that is some fine praise. Welcome.
Yes, Alex was very generous with his compliments there, but hopefully many people will feel that I'm making a valuable contribution to the information war that we are undoubtedly all engaged in.
Yeah, indeed. And there's so much that you're going on, and you were talking about yesterday. We're going to continue with the latest news now and also preview some information that's coming up for the weekend. But I want to go straight to Pakistan, where we're going to talk about Imran Khan and the latest where we're talking about now military courts.
Yes, so there's quite a bit of news out of Pakistan from today. So Imran Khan has had his protective bail rolled over into June, but only for the cases that have been initiated in Islamabad. So he's still going to have to make some other court appearances to deal with the cases that he has outstanding in Lahore, for example. But the Interior Minister, who we've dealt with, Mr. Sanalala, before, he went on TV and has basically announced that Imran Khan will face a military tribunal as opposed to a civilian court because it is alleged that he encouraged / instigated / planned, allegedly, the attacks on various military and police installations on March the 9th, having been violently abducted from that courthouse. Now, on the face of it, those allegations seem quite absurd because he was held incommunicado overnight. The protests that did occur seem to have been entirely spontaneous. And there's now allegations and a 20-minute video put out by his political party, the PTI, suggesting in much the same way as we had that Ray Epps character involved in organising people on January 5th and January 6th.
Yes.
That there were similar figures amongst the protest groups egging them on to commit acts of violence and arson. So from the perspective of the PTI, it was very much a false flag. It does appear genuinely extremely hard for civilians just to have wandered onto a major army base that has like 4 layers of identity checks and road blocks and armed guards. You know, it's like, I don't know, whatever what is it, Campbell Barracks in Perth, where the Australian SAS are, right? Campbell Barracks, I believe,
yes.
right?
Yep.
You can't just wander on to Campbell Barracks and say, I'd like to take a few pictures and, by the way, I've got, a bag full of petrol bombs with me, right? You're going to get thrown on the ground before you're within 500 meters of the gate.
Yes.
So that whole story that, a couple of hundred people just wandered onto the base and set fire to the general's house, frankly, seems a little bit extraordinary. But that's the basis upon which they're now claiming that he's going to go before a military tribunal. Now, the significance of that is, 1, he won't have a jury. 2, the officers that would be trying him may well have been subject to some degree of command pressure for them to reach a pre-agreed verdict. 2, he won't necessarily be able to have a civilian lawyer of his choice. 3, the rules of procedure are going to be significantly different. 4, if he is convicted, then it's highly unlikely that he'll be granted bail whilst appealing. He's then going to have to, in the first instance, appeal to the chief of the army staff, who's the whole guy that he's in conflict with. So that there's clearly a conflict of interest within the chain of command. And only then would he get to appeal to one of the provincial high courts and then to the national Supreme Court. Now, the problem there is that even if he were to be successful in appealing to either one of the state Supreme Courts or to the national Supreme Court, he could be in jail for years, because the wheels of justice turn very slowly indeed in Pakistan, and for that matter in India. They have cases that have been pending for 20 years in some cases, right? Now, if there's an election in October and he's been convicted and he's in prison, then not only will he be eligible to run for one of the seats, but he won't even be able to campaign for his colleagues, because he'll essentially be held incommunicado. So that's a huge problem for the forthcoming elections, even assuming that they're held on time and that a nationwide state of emergency isn't declared. Now, in the meantime, 25 of the people who have resigned under various degrees of pressure from his party, the PTI, now appear to have joined the party of the current foreign minister, who's the son of the previous Prime Minister Benazir Bhutto. That's Bilawal Bhutto, who's the one who's groveling in front of the Chinese foreign minister on a couple of occasions when he visited. I mean, really, really, prostrating himself. And so he now seems to be recruiting a lot of the politicians who want to stay in the game. And even though it's an incredible political change from one side to the other, they may figure that their name recognition will be sufficient to get them elected on October. Now, Imran Khan's made it very clear that he's going to bring in a new generation of political activists, which frankly, given the age of the electorate in Pakistan, which is very young in comparison to lots of European countries and Japan, for example, that may be very, very popular. So that may be somewhat of a blessing in disguise. Now, there's also talk that some of the other members of his party who have resigned and who aren't jumping on the other ship, but aren't also disavowing politics altogether, they're now talking about generating yet another political party in Pakistan. Frankly, I've lost count. It'll be like party number 20 or something. But that could dilute his vote. And even if they only take away 3, 4, 5% based upon name recognition in the constituencies that they've previously been successfully elected to in 2019, then that may be enough to let the coalition, the government coalition, bear in mind they've got 11 parties running together. If there's let's say that it's, he was going to get 50, he gets taken down to 40, they get 10, and the other party gets 45, then taking him from 50 to 40 may allow the other party, if they get 45, to be the winner in a first past the post system.
Yes.
So that may be just enough to take away enough political parties that he can't run an effective majority in the national parliament. So those are the shenanigans that are going on so far. They've released 30 of the high profile women prisoners, I think 29 out of about 50. So there's a little bit of progress there, though many of them are still on bail, and so will have to reappear in a few weeks. That is about all the news that we've got so far out of Pakistan. I am keeping a really close eye on that situation there, but we're in a kind of temporary hiatus. He's been bailed by the anti-terrorism courts, but it is possible that the military would just nab him if he's going to face a tribunal, and it's clear that they would like that to happen sooner rather than later.
Do you think that this approach by his opponents in Pakistan is going to be enough to subdue him at this point? Has he got any hope of getting to a position where he can rerun for election?
Well, he personally has got a lot of headwind against him. It's interesting that both the Pakistan National Human Rights Watch and also the international organization Human Rights Watch have both expressed the opinion that civilians should not be tried in military courts. It's doubtful how much influence that will have in practice. He's in a very, very difficult spot. He's tried to form this committee to negotiate with the government. Government's refusing to do that. He's kind of like put this challenge about, you can try and break my supporters, you can try and break my party, which I still strongly disagree with, given the level of personal risk that puts people in. But we're only a couple of days into that 4-week period, so we'll see what happens there. Supposedly today was going to be the deadline that the Prime Minister and the Interior Minister had given the police for arresting, using facial recognition, all those who had been involved in acts of arson. But it's clear that many thousands of people who are closely associated with the PTI have gone into hiding both in Pakistan, and many of them it's believed that they've actually left the country. So it's still very much in a state of flux. I'm not sure that we'll have any certainty by Friday my time, Saturday your time, but certainly next week there'll be more indications as to whether or not the roundups are still ongoing. It's interesting that a very popular chap, Major Raja Adil, he is still completely banned of many of his accounts, despite having like 1 million viewers on some of them. And so he's now had to diversify his sources, still finding that the information stream from PTI Canada, UK and US is very slow, and particularly slow to put out English versions of the information. There are plenty of English language newspapers and websites, though the word is that they're under enormous pressure from the government to not cast Imran Khan in any positive light whatsoever.
Yes.
And the things like the state radio of Pakistan, that's just sheer propaganda at this point.
Yes, okay. Well, when it comes to Pakistan, it's certainly just not cricket, especially when Imran Khan, the great cricketer and Prime Minister, is under attack from within the establishment. Now, Simon, another big story that's come up, and we're going to call this the Volksstrum moment, and we'll put that up on screen there. I'll get you to explain what this means, and in light of what's happening out of Ukraine.
So, I should warn that I haven't been able to verify all the translations at this point, though it seems to come from very consistent sources. Plus, it's not that much of a stretch, because we've seen video of military recruiters literally grabbing 15, 16, 17-year-olds off the street and out of shopping malls, and literally out of their mother's arms in some cases, despite some street scuffles with their families trying to prevent these teenagers from being conscripted, which is actually illegal under international law. You're not allowed to. You can accept volunteers into the military at 17 and a half, but you're not supposed to conscript anybody under the age of 18. And the British government have been criticized for that for many years, because they actually have like a military school where you can join as a cadet at 16. You're technically in the army, though they promise you won't be deployed overseas until you're 18. But within Ukraine, you're not being deployed overseas, you're being deployed internally, and in many cases with like a week's worth of training. So the revisions, which are due to take force, well, in Ukraine, they've already taken force, because in Ukraine it's now about 2 a.m. On the 1st of June, is now that any man from the age of 18 all the way through to the age of 60 is eligible for conscription. The time period is not specified, so it may be the duration or until dead. And the provisions that previously existed about you being able to appeal your conscription on the basis that you had a sick mother or 10 children, or you already had one leg blown off, all of those exemptions, which would generally be classified as special circumstances or medical disability, are gone. Your right to appeal is gone. The ability to actually conscript you has now been vastly extended to many other agents of the state other than the military recruitment officers, pretty much down to everybody apart from postmen can now hand you a military service notice that doesn't even have to have your name and particulars on it, but when served you have to report to the nearest recruiting station within a very short period of time. I think it's like 2 days. So on the face of it, it would look like Ukraine is really scraping the bottle of the barrel. The reference Volksstrum is because this is what the German military did in, I think it was September or October 1944. And they said 16 to 60. They ended up taking people all the way down to the age of 12. They were issuing these children with what were called Panzerfaust and old bolt-action rifles. and tried to deploy them in order to fight against both the advancing Allies and the advancing Soviet forces. Really quite tragic. And it makes you wonder that if the Ukrainians have already previously enlisted over the course of this year 1 million, and they're now trying to take in disabled 60-year-olds, what the scale of their losses to date have actually really been. But it's generally just like incredibly tragic circumstances. And, you know, once they've done this and they've got everyone 15 to 60, then they're taking a lot of female volunteers, but it would appear that as of yet, they're not conscripting the women. That's very much in keeping with what the Germans did in World War II. They felt that it was necessary for women to stay home and work towards a goal of having 20 children so that they could breed the master race. But the discos of Kiev that otherwise seem quite jam-packed, we're going to have to stop distributing condoms if these women are going to be breeding 20 children each in the space of the next 12 months.
Wow, it's just horrible, isn't it? In whichever way we look at it. Now, I want to bring up Alexander Dugin again, and he's a very, very important player, an intellectual in the Russian space, and closely linked to Putin. I'm going to put his picture up on screen just so that you can introduce him, and more so people can get their reference point. We're going to bring up another picture here of Dugin and his daughter, who was taken out in an attack, and I'll get you to explain that as we move towards the news that's come out today with Alexander Dugin on Twitter.
So he's written many books. Many people regard him as, you know, quite an astute analyzer of geopolitics and also a philosopher. He had a daughter called Dugina, who was assassinated in what appeared to have been an attempt to kill Alexander Dugin. She literally drove away in his car from an event that blew up, but it was literally they kind of like exchanged keys at the end of some public event, rather tragic. Now, he spoke with Zaporova and some other individuals at an event that occurred on the 24th of
May. Yep.
May.
Yep.
And that it was the Tsargrad Institute, and he just reported it, put out a long article today. It's very, very interesting. I'll link it to the show afterwards. But one of the people there was called Konstantin Manofeev. He's the deputy head of the World Council of Russian People and a founder of First Russia. Now, I appreciate that he's very biased and, you know, a political figure before people, you know, start jumping down our throats on the nature of the person that we're quoting. But the reason why this struck me when I was reading the article, and there were several interesting quotes, but this one really stood out, was in the context, albeit that they're out of order chronologically, of when Putin had spoken to the All Russian Business Association last Friday. And we discussed that a couple of days ago, where he was talking about Russian businesses protecting the history of the nation and its sovereignty of values and cultural sovereignty. Okay, so what we're looking here is for trends and patterns and consistency between different political commentators. So I'll give this quote, and it's in the context of it being very consistent with what Putin said just a couple of days later. So this man said, "We have a holy war with holy goals. We are fighting for our land, for our people, for our history, for our culture, for our future. They, meaning NATO, are fighting in the middle of nowhere as far as Americans and Western Europeans are concerned. They're trying to create artificial meanings and artificial goals for which they are supposedly fighting. Now, we could spend a lot of time analysing that, but I think that quite a few people in Western Europe, and certainly a lot of conservatives in the United States, are starting to come round to that opinion. And it's interesting that in the United States, it now appears that as part of the debt ceiling deal, that any further US contributions to the war effort in Ukraine are going to be not subject to the limitations. So they're basically going to be entirely at the discretion of the president. Now, that's very, very concerning, because frankly, Biden could say, we're going to put in another 100 billion, we're going to put in another 200 billion, we're going to put in another 500 billion, because this deal is going to go all the way through until January the 1st, 2025. And even then, that deadline is a few days before the new congressional members are sworn in for the next session that will have been elected in November of 2024. So that's essentially the lame duck session. That's where people who may have been voted out of office in November, but they don't actually transition over to the new people until January. So in December of 2024, not only may those people have racked up an enormous amount of expenditure, literal money printing, from now until then, but that they may vote on all kinds of schemes that then tie the hands of their successors for the next 2 years. And that's why we're starting to see a groundswell of political opinion against that debt deal. Though there was one individual, Representative Massey, who was the swing vote in the Rules Committee, and he could have blocked that whole debt deal going forward, and he didn't. And it went through by 7 votes to 6. And he was the tiebreaker. And everyone had expected him to stick to his fiscal and social conservative principles and block this limitless spending for the next 18 months. But he put out this very mealy-mouthed statement saying that, he didn't see his elected role as being blocking legislation from even being considered on the floor of the House of Representatives. So he was going to vote it out of committee so that everyone could vote on it, all 435 members of the House of Representatives. But we know that it's going to go through because loads of the Democrats are going to vote for it because Biden is asking them to, and their House and Senate leadership are asking them to. Okay, so when McCarthy, on the whatever it was, the 24th vote or whatever it was, when they finally got enough of the Conservatives to back him so that he scraped over the line by like 1 vote, which in itself was absolutely humiliating for him because it was vote after vote after vote till like 3 a.m. Part of that deal was that 3 hardcore conservatives were going to be put on this very important House Rules Committee. Now, Massey was one of those 3 people. And the reason why he was named to that position was precisely because they were there as a block to crazy, out of control congressional spending. And at the first test, he has failed.
Yes.
And that is a huge disappointment. Now, other people like Marjorie Taylor Greene, who very early on embraced the speakership candidacy of Mr. McCarthy, they're also looking very, very poor in the light of this deal that he supposedly...
Just have a bit of a glitch there with the connection with Simon. He should be back in just a second, and we'll see what's going on. Simon,
We're
are you
back.
still there? Gotcha.
Good,
there.
we're
Yep.
back. Just a momentary glitch. It looks like a 90% Democrat victory and a 10% Republican compromise yet again.
Yes.
And we have seen this now for 20 years, that whenever the crunch time comes, the Republicans, even when they have like total dominance and are able to force really harsh conditions upon the Democrats, they just collapse and they just give in. And this is exactly what has happened again this time. It is completely absurd. But unfortunately, the Wets in their party and in the Senate will vote with the Democrats. And even if half the Republicans, which I doubt it will be, but even if it were half, say no, this deal will go through. Biden will sign it, and they'll then spend like drunken sailors for the next 18 months, which is going to be extremely inflationary.
That's right.
Which has negative consequences for other countries like Australia. Do you want to mention that data?
I've just put it up on the screen for you now. Your great minds think alike. We are the News Brothers here at World Series News. I'm just going to just make a quick little presentation, if you will. Simon did very well yesterday with Alex Jones, and I'm just going to play a quick clip now from what Harrison said when you were on his show again, Simon. And just to keep our information warriors up to date, Simon's had a big appearance yesterday on multiple programs, received high praise. And I'm just going to play a couple of clips now, just as people are tuning in, and please share this information far and wide. You don't get this level of detail anywhere else. And I'm going to play Harrison's clip now and a couple of other bit of housekeeping, and we'll get on with the latest Australian inflation data in a moment as it pertains to the US debt ceiling deal.
Not so jokingly referred to you as like our foreign correspondent, because honestly, you really have your finger on the pulse here, and there's so much stuff that it does seem incredibly important, and yet I don't see it anywhere, but you're always trolling the international newspapers that tend to actually shine light on some of this stuff. It is Simon in Florida who called into the Alex Jones show yesterday and had a really bombshell conversation with Owen and Alex. I don't know if I've ever heard Alex so profusely complimenting a caller like he did to Simon yesterday, for good reason. Simon's got his finger on the pulse of international goings on, and so wanted to bring him on today to talk about some of the developments.
So a bit of a plug there for you, Simon. I've put your Twitter there on the screen at the bottom, at Simon from Flory2. You'll get all of the raw data and information that Simon uses on his appearances here on World Series News as part of the News Brothers team, and of course on the Info Warriors, let's call it, show, because we're always playing with these censors. This show does go out on Facebook and YouTube. Can you believe that? It will be on Rumble. I'll put that detail there for you as well if you want to look me up on Rumble to get these shows. Just look for the Jason Olborn there, and you'll find it with the Jason Q Citizen reference as well. Is another way to make sure that you get hold of it. We are, of course, playing live now on Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook right now. So if you can share, that'd be wonderful. We had a huge show on Monday. We're back on Thursdays and Saturdays at 9 a.m. Australian time. That's East Coast Australia. And if you're watching from the United States at East Coast time, it's 7 p.m. on Sunday night, on Wednesday night, and Friday night are the days that we go live there as well. I'll take that off there. And Simon, just to go into this Australian data here, we learnt yesterday that the inflation rate went above the expectations of the low sixes. It's now at 6.8% in April. This after Governor Philip Lowe said that the budget wouldn't be inflationary, but has now warned that they're going to have to rack up interest rates again and again and again.
Yeah, it's worse than that. He's actually said that Australian households need to brace for pain. So that doesn't sound very pleasant. And he's indicating that there will be, a substantial number of rate increases. Previous month was 6.3%. They were anticipating the consensus of the economists, who are the people who write excuses after their forecasts are wrong. They were guessing at 6.4. It came in at 6.8. Now, to tie in to what I had discussed yesterday with Alex, we were talking about the vulnerability of the US electrical grid and its potential that even if it wasn't attacked by foreign forces, for it to be weaponized and used as part of some globalist scheme against the American population. And that also applies exactly to people in Britain and to people in Australia, as the government are following these kind of WEF schemes to completely decarbonize their national power grids and make everything run off electricity. Then the smart meters that people have in their houses and the agreements that many people have signed to allow utilities companies to throttle back their usage during peak periods. You can't run your tumble dryer, or you can't run your washing machine, or you can't run your electric oven, for example, right? That's all not only providing for supply restriction at set periods of time, but it also gives them a mechanism to introduce formal rationing through the form of individual monthly carbon limits, which is all tied into the new World Bank head, who's a joint American-Indian citizen who previously ran MasterCard, where they piloted what people are now seeing on their bank statements and their credit card statements in Australia, where they tell you how many kilograms of carbon dioxide you've used per month and invite you to pay a surcharge to offset that. That's going to become a hard limit. And that ties in with COP28 in the United Arab Emirates, where the theme for this year in December is, quote, responsible consumption, which is the code word for rationing.
Yeah, that's absolutely shocking. And this is the hard part with what's going on here, is these politicians problem, reaction, solution. Every single time they make the problem, they tell us the solution, well, obviously with the reaction in the middle. And each time it's their level of incompetence, and yet they get another round to justify that they're going to go in harder again. One wonders in all of this if this is all about somehow we've all become hostages of Mother Earth that can no longer sustain us. And in every single way, we're looking at ways of rationing, of cutting, etc. And the only word that we don't get told in all of this is, when is the great cull happening? Well, we've heard all about that for the last 3 years, and we watch as things are going on, and we brace with the World Health Assembly changing the rules there so that they can get control of our sovereign nations and their health plans, so that whenever they want to issue the next big disaster, it's just ticket it right out there. And in my radio show today, Simon, I'm going to be talking about a little bit of a resistance here in Australia to do with central bank digital currency and also a cashless society. I'll put that up on the screen right now if you'd like to tune in at TNT Radio there. That's my new show. You just tune in right there, www.tntradio.live from 1 p.m. today. I'll be talking about that and some other issues, including James Comey's talking about the Durham report, and interesting to hear how he can gloss over all of the indiscretions that they came up with there. And an interesting story coming out of our human origins, a new study coming out of McGill University. That'll be fascinating. And we're going to talk about remdesivir as well on the show show and how it was used in the unjabbed here in Australia. Truly shocking what's going on there. But to continue again with the show, Simon, jumping ahead to you mentioned the UAE. There's a story coming out now from Jerusalem Post with the UAE positioning itself for a UN Security Council presidency.
Yeah, so the presidency, which enables people to really, to a large extent, dictate the agenda, is handed from country to country every month. Now, starting tomorrow or the next day, the United Arab Emirates is going to assume that position. But what was interesting, and this is a lesson here for many of the audience, is I noticed that article, so I kind of like clicked on it and thought, okay, I'll just check out, see if they've announced what their agenda is.
Might have lost you again, Simon. That internet is just being a bit of a glitch there. Got you back?
I'm back?
Yeah, got you.
Great, okay. So they said that they were going to use their position to pursue peace in the Middle East. So that would be very interesting to see whether or not they really push a regional agenda or if they just talk about Palestine. But
some problems today with the internet there. Have I got you back again?
Are we back again? Good, okay.
Yeah.
Further on in the article, they were mentioning about these coalition maritime task forces. Now, they were talking about 3 of them in particular. They're basically headed up by the Americans, and they're used as cover for their force projection in the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman. But obviously, we've been talking about it a great deal in terms of the Gulf Cooperation Council, the Iranians, and the Omanis in particular. So the Americans are very, very obviously concerned about being squeezed out of the region, which I think is inevitable in the long run. It just depends on how bumpy the road is. But they've got one task force which is simulations and training. They've got another task force which is now going to be using a lot of unmanned vehicles, both drone swarms and naval unmanned ships. 100 unmanned ships and 1,000 drones. So
whilst you're talking, Simon, I'm going to play some vision now of some drone swarms, but from a more socially acceptable point of view, just to give the viewers an idea of what we're talking about. Keep talking.
Yeah. So as well as them planning on doing this in the Persian Gulf, then they had another group that was about 25 countries, including several of the European nations, France, Italy, and the UK in particular. And they had all been contributing naval forces for patrolling in the Persian Gulf and also in the North Indian Ocean. And what has happened, and this really is quite surprising because the UAE really have quite a close relationship, at least they have done, with the Americans. And as we discussed, they're part of the I2U2 movement. But they've now withdrawn from the coalition Maritime Task Force number 153. Now, the really odd thing about that is, one, that they're the first country to pull out. Okay. 2, they're saying that they gave notice of their withdrawal of military contributions to that 2 months ago. But as of today, the Americans are claiming that they've never been told that the UAE are withdrawing. Now, the thing to watch, and this is where on this program we try and give people things to look out for in the future, is if other countries, one by one, start pulling out of this 25-nation coalition. It'd be real interesting to see whether or not the Omanis pull out next, or if, like Hungary in NATO, they remain in it as a spoiler. So they're not only getting all the intelligence, but they also have the ability to block unanimous votes. But if the Omanis pull out and make some big statement about them essentially allying with the Iranians, then that will obviously be very dramatic. And this should all be seen in the light of that speech that Mr. Khazari from the Supreme Council of Foreign Relations of Iran gave in Qatar just a few days ago that we covered on the last show. So there's a lot going on there, and it's all, it seems quite technical, and it's this task force and that's task force, and maybe they forgot to send the paperwork in or whatever. But just as I've been explaining with the different statements coming out of Russia, we're looking for trends and patterns here. And if we see, like one country, then two countries, then four countries, then five countries, that obviously indicates that there are a lot of people peeling away from the American influence. Now, the reason why we've been showing those drone images is, one, they're absolutely spectacular, the golden dragon and the flaming phoenix in China. But those, not only for cultural events but also for military applications, indicate just the level of coordination of 500 or more drones that can be achieved, not just using teams of human operators, but actually using a program run by artificial intelligence. And now what's interesting is, this is directly relevant for your Australian audience, is aware of the 15-year time gap that exists on their AUKUS project, that as well as putting on air deliverable high sensitivity submarine listening equipment that can literally be flown in a shipping container in a heavy duty helicopter transfer, dumped onto the deck of a Australian Navy ship, and then set up to patrol in some of the large areas of the Pacific, listening for Chinese submarines, that now the Australian military have indicated that they're going to buy enormous numbers of drones that could be armed in order that they can be operated in swarms by artificial intelligence. So you can see that the stopgap measures that they're starting to put into place, because they're acutely aware that they're very much going to be late to the game on a potential conflict with China. And I think that neatly segues us to the conference that's coming up this weekend, if I'm not mistaken, right?
That's right. So we've got the IISS, the International Institute of Strategic Studies conference this weekend, starting on Friday, actually, and that's in Singapore.
Yes, indeed. So what's particularly interesting about that is that the theme of that is European engagement in the Indo-Pacific area, which basically means other NATO countries patrolling the South China Sea, which has the Chinese extremely upset. And already at the large naval conference, that actually there was two in Britain, one on the 16th and 17th and one the following week, where it was announced that next year, first the Italians and then the French are each going to send entire aircraft carrier task forces that will have a mixed complement of escort ships. So there'll be a couple of Belgian, a couple of Dutch, a couple of German, but with all surrounding one big aircraft carrier. First from the Italians, and then secondly, it's the Charles de Gaulle, which is the big aircraft carrier that the French have got. They've just spent years and years retrofitting, and then assuming they can get it out of out of Portsmouth Harbour, which is very questionable, the British have announced that they are going to send first a submarine, an Astute-class submarine that we've discussed previously, and then one of their Queen Elizabeth-class large aircraft carriers with a couple of squadrons of F-35s on it. So, consistent with the announcements made at the Munich Security Conference in March, NATO is very much projecting force into what they call the Indo-Pacific region, though it's really not the Indian Ocean, it's very much the South China Sea. Operating in conjunction with the Australians, the Japanese, and the South Koreans. Now, it's been announced also that this week, as we speak, the Americans and the Japanese, and this is for the first time in a century, that the Filipino Coast Guard is running joint exercises and patrols with the Japanese Coast Guard. Now, you've got to bear in mind that not only did you have the Bataan Death March in 1942, but you then had the guerrilla war against the Japanese in the second half of the Second World War. And then when the Americans under MacArthur reinvaded the Philippines, which was in like 44, I believe, the Japanese, rather than declaring Manila an open city and withdrawing to fight in the jungle, they burnt the whole of the capital of the Philippines like literally to the ground, like scorched earth. And it was largely made of wood. So that was an enormous conflagration, and then resulted in not only massive homelessness, but also a great deal of starvation once the war ended as well, which the Americans weren't really able to fully deal with. So one would have thought there'd be still a great deal of residual animosity. And I feel quite sorry for the Filipinos, that not only have they been compelled to have an additional 4 military bases, all facing very closely towards not only the Spratly Islands, but also the southernmost point of Taiwan. But now they're also being obliged to do naval drills with their long-term foes. Now, interestingly enough, in the political polls, you've got the son of Ferdinand Marcos is the current president. Right? The previous president was called Duterte, and he was very anti-drugs. He was very strict on the COVID lockdowns, but he was also quite standoffish with the Americans, really didn't cooperate with them very much on defense policy. His daughter is the current vice president, and that's because they have a separate election for president and vice president. So even though she's from a different political party, she's the current vice president. Now, in practice, that means that she doesn't have very much power. But because the Filipino people are so unhappy about how beholden the Philippines are becoming to the Americans, much like Norway and Greece at this moment, that she is now polling hugely ahead of any other current theoretical presidential contenders for the next election, because like her father, she's much more independent from the Americans. So that's very, very interesting to see that level of re-engagement hasn't been popular at all with the general citizenry of the Philippines. So, the Americans have got a potential problem there. They think they've made this great strategic advance, but it may be very short-lived indeed.
It's very, very interesting. Last thing I want to bring up here, I'm just going to put on the screen, is a tweet referring to this Swedish conference. I just want to read it out here. The European Union removed explicit references to China as a non-market economy from the document, which defines the common trade strategy with the USA. In the negotiations which showed that EU members are hesitant to approach China more aggressively, the European bloc only agreed on a watered-down text of the joint conclusions from the meeting of the EU-US Trade and Technology Council in Sweden, according to anonymous sources, reports Bloomberg. The document is still waiting US approval. So it seems now, Simon, that part of Europe and the United States are doing everything they can to cancel China is in their appearance, in their positioning, in their naming, and of course in their power in the Indo-Pacific. So we're seeing a real trend here that Europe is kind of being brought in to do the argy-bargy, the dirty work, as it were, and the lead up to this week's conference is a crucial point here.
Yeah, well, what is reflected there is the difference between the EU and NATO. Okay, so some of the NATO partners are saying, fine, we'll back you all the way and we'll send pretty much half our navy 10,000 miles away where we've got no business being whatsoever. We've got no defense obligations. We've got no mutual defense treaties. And we're going to cruise up and down the Taiwan Strait, just begging the Chinese to hit us with 100 Silkworm anti-ship missiles, right? But what's interesting there is that exposes the split in the European Union with regard to trade policy with China. Yes. And so whereas we had the Xi'an incident about the C5, and now we've got the Voldemort incident, which is like from Harry Potter, he who shall not be named. And so literally in the joint communique on the US-EU Trade and Technology Conference, it's called the TTC, yes. US-EU TTC. They are so scared of pissing off China that a good half of the European countries literally will not put their name in writing. And that's why it's being referred to as the non-market economy. That's the new code phrase for people to look out for, like strategic independence and strategic autonomy, for China in European documents. It's frankly quite pathetic. So they're kind of like giving in to the Americans, but they won't admit what they're giving in about. Now, what's interesting is the Americans don't seem to be happy about that, and they're still arguing overnight, because it's now like 1 a.m. or 2 a.m. in the morning in Sweden, for the name China to be put into the joint communique. Now, they're either going to have to issue separate communiques, which is always a sign of trouble, or they're going to have to back down and allow this to go out. Now, the other thing that's happened is at the Global Security Conference in Bratislava, which has been happening at the same time, and that's Macron speaking, and he is now talking about even if they can't join NATO, Eastern European countries, by which he's referring to basically Bosnia, Moldova, and potentially Ukraine, being given security guarantees by the European Defence Force before they qualify for NATO membership. And this is quite extraordinary that he would propose that somehow NATO, excluding Britain, Canada, and America, just the European Defence Force, is somehow going to defend Moldova, Bosnia, and Ukraine. Yes. But this is very much what the Ukrainians are begging for. They want to have a specific roadmap with dates published in advance of the NATO summit in Vilnius in July. the Eastern Europeans are backing them, but the Western Europeans are not, because then that would basically allow Zelensky to do whatever the hell he likes for the intervening period, because it's basically been set in stone as a timetable. So they really don't want to see that happening. But once again, you can see that the European Union is really unable to speak with any degree of consistency. We've got trouble occurring in Kosovo. Maybe we can touch upon that on Friday. The ISS, if people want to hear more about that, they can go and listen to my conversation with Harrison today. But you and I will go into that on Friday and Sunday, so we're very, very hot on that, and we'll discuss that issue with our audience as the News Brothers masquerading as the Blues Brothers.
That's the one. Well, thanks, Simon. It's been a terrific update yet again. And as Simon just said, Friday and Sunday, which is a Saturday and Monday mornings here in Australia. We'll wrap it up there. Lots going on. I'm going to just play us out right now as we go. But if you can share and obviously have a look on Simon's Twitter, Simon from Flory 2, and you'll get all the details in there as well. And thanks to all the new viewers that are watching today for sharing, liking, following, and so on. We're out, and we'll see you all in 2 days' time.
106 miles to Chicago. We got a full tank of gas, half a